Welcome to Brief Screen. In this video, I will explain a suspense film called Bodyguard. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive into the heart of the film and explore what makes Bodyguard a must-watch. The film begins with a man named David Budd on a train in London, accompanied by his two kids. Soon, he sees a strange man throwing away his phone in the trash and entering the toilet. He also notices a female train guard who appears to be extremely anxious. She goes on to check on the man in the toilet but doesn't get a response. Seeing this, David asks a passenger to look after his kids and goes to talk to the female guard. He introduces himself as a police officer and asks her what is happening. The guard confides in David, her voice trembling, that they've received a tip about a potential terrorist on the train. She suspects the man in the restroom is the threat due to his suspicious behavior. Alarmed, David decides to confront the suspect and ask the guard to unlock the door. He mentally prepares to act swiftly, even considering pushing the man out of an open door if he has a bomb. However, moments later, the man exits the restroom calmly, without any device, and casually returns to his seat. After a sigh of relief, David enters the toilet to see if the man has placed a device there. However, he is surprised to discover a terrified woman with a bomb around her waist. David senses that she is scared and doesn't want to do this, so he talks to her. The woman reveals her name is Nadia, and the suspicious man from before is her husband. Nadia attempts to detonate the device, but David intervenes and calms her down. He tells her about his time as a military officer in Afghanistan and how terrorism and violence never end well. David urges her to abandon the mission, assuring her that he will keep her safe from her husband. Shortly thereafter, the train comes to a halt and several police officers board. As they prepare to take action against Nadia, David intervenes and informs them that she is ready to surrender. Nadia then emerges from the restroom, and an officer swiftly defuses the bomb, removing it from her waist. With the threat neutralized, Nadia's husband is taken into custody, and Nadia is escorted away for further questioning. In the following scene, David drops his children off at his ex-wife Vicky's house. After tucking the kids in, he and Vicky have a conversation, and she invites him to stay the night. When David tries to kiss her, she immediately pulls back, clarifying that she didn't intend for it to be romantic. David, deeply frustrated, leaves the house abruptly. The following morning, David is summoned by his boss, who praises him for what he did on the train. She also offers him the position of bodyguard to Home Secretary Julia Montague, who is running for Prime Minister. David gladly accepts the job and returns home, where he does some research on Julia Montague. He discovers that she is very supportive of military action overseas. This upsets David a bit as he's still dealing with PTSD from his time in Afghanistan. The next day, David arrives for his first day of work as Julia's bodyguard and greets her. He advises her to enter the minister's building through the underground entrance for her safety. However, Julia appears uninterested and walks away without responding. David then follows her around while she works and takes her home at the end of the day. During the drive, he suggests that the driver take a different route because the current one appears to be unsafe. His interference annoys Julia, but he states that he's just trying to keep her safe. When they arrive at Julia's home, he begins to inspect each room for potential security threats. This annoys her once more, and she asks him to leave. But David explains that he is simply doing his job. Moments later, Julia reads his report and realizes that he was the one who successfully prevented the train bombing incident. She begins to soften toward him and apologizes for her previous behavior. David also doesn't make a big deal out of it, and they shake hands. The next day, Julia is getting ready for an interview when her assistant accidentally spills coffee on her. David offers his shirt without hesitation, and she is moved by the gesture. Shortly after, the interview begins, and David observes Julia discussing her military plans. We see that it causes him significant stress as it brings back his memories of the war. In the evening, when they arrive at Julia's place, she thanks David for his shirt. She also tells him that the terrorist caught on the train is going to be executed. When asked about Nadia, she reveals that she has not said anything and is still terrified. After the incident, Julia asks David about his family, and he shares that he is married and has 2 children. Julia then reveals that she was once a criminal lawyer who transitioned into politics to address the systemic issues she encountered in the legal field. David admits that he doesn't agree with many of her political views, to which Julia responds that he doesn't need to support her policies. His sole responsibility is to protect her. Later, David returns home and tries to call Vicky again, but she doesn't answer, leaving him increasingly frustrated. Determined to mend their relationship, David decides to visit her the next morning. To his dismay, Vicky informs him that she has already started seeing someone new. This revelation devastates David, and he pleads with her not to finalize the divorce just yet. He explains that if something were to happen to him, she would be entitled to his pension if they remain legally married. In a subsequent scene, David meets up with Andy, a fellow veteran with whom he served in the military. Andy, visibly scarred both physically and emotionally from his service, expresses his disappointment upon learning that David now works for the Home Secretary. He harshly criticizes David for aligning himself with the politicians responsible for the deaths of their comrades. Although David understands Andy's perspective, he struggles to find a suitable response. The following morning, David drops his children off at school. We learn that his son has developmental issues, leading to frequent bullying from other students. His son is reluctant to go to school, but David encourages him to stand up to the bullies and to report any incidents to the principal. With heavy reluctance, the boy finally goes inside. Later, while David and Julia are on their way to work, David's phone repeatedly rings with calls from Vicky. Initially, he tries to ignore them, but when the calls persist, Julia urges him to answer. Vicky informs David that the special school they had applied to for their son has no available spots. She is understandably upset, but David reassures her that they will find an alternative. He briefly mentions that he's at work before ending the call. Upon arriving at their destination, David apologizes to Julia for taking a personal call, but she seems understanding and unbothered. Later at the office, Julia meets with a man who informs her about a potential terrorist attack on a school. The man tells her that it is the same school that David's children attend, which surprises her. They suspect that this operation is revenge for David's efforts to prevent the terrorist attack on the train. However, they decide not to inform the school, but instead tighten the security to avoid causing panic among people. The next morning, children are playing at the school when terrorists arrive in a white van and prepare to attack. Seeing this, a teacher quickly takes the children inside, and a police van arrives in front of the school to keep the terrorists out. They then shoot down the bad guys, causing their truck to crash. It appears that they are dead, so an officer approaches the truck to confirm. Unfortunately, one of the terrorists is still alive, and he quickly detonates the bomb. As a result, the vehicle explodes, killing 3 officers in the process. Later, when David learns of the attack, he immediately calls Vicky and is relieved to hear that their children are safe. He is then summoned by his boss, who informs him that this act could be retaliation for the train incident. As a result, his wife and children have been relocated to a guarded shelter in case of future attacks. This makes David happy, but then his boss shocks him by revealing that he has been relieved of his duties as Julia's bodyguard and assigned a desk job. David demands to know why he is being punished, but his boss responds that because the terrorists are after him, it is too dangerous for him to be with Julia. In the end, he has no choice but to obey his superior's orders. Later, David meets up with Andy again and gets drunk. They discuss the government's response to the terror attack, and Andy remarks that Julia is simply exploiting the situation to gain more power. He asks how she would feel if she had to go through what they did. Hearing this, David is speechless as he realizes that his friend intends to harm her. The next morning, Vicky receives a letter informing her that a spot at the special school has suddenly become available. She immediately informs David, and they celebrate the news. Later, he is summoned by his boss, who informs him that he has been reinstated as Julia's bodyguard. David inquires how this happened, and she responds that he appears to have made some high-ranking friends. Hearing this, David quickly understands that it was Julia who summoned him back and also helped with his son's school. Later, he reports for duty, and Julia says it is good to have him back. In the evening, she invites him to have dinner with her, which he accepts. They begin talking about their personal lives, and Julia reveals that she was once married. David also admits that he has been separated from his wife and is only maintaining a good relationship for the sake of their children. He thanks her for her help with his son's school situation, to which Julia responds that she entered politics to help people. The next day, Julia and David are driving to a meeting with the Prime Minister, but shortly after, someone unexpectedly fires at the car, killing the driver on the spot. David realizes that they are in danger, so he quickly springs into action and tells Julia to stay low. The bullets keep coming at the car, but he assures her that they will not penetrate the armored metal. He even holds her hand to calm her down. Following the incident, David immediately calls the police and waits anxiously for backup to arrive. As time passes and no reinforcements show up, the sniper's continued gunfire leaves David with no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He starts driving erratically, trying to evade the sniper's shots, and eventually pulls over. Stepping out of the car, he takes a photograph of the surroundings to better understand the situation. It soon becomes clear to him that the sniper is positioned on the roof of a nearby building. David makes a quick decision to confront the threat directly. He enters the building and races up to the rooftop. Julia, who is visibly terrified, pleads with him not to leave her side. David, however, reassures her that he will be careful and instructs her to stay inside the car for her own safety. Upon reaching the rooftop, David is stunned to find that the sniper is none other than Andy, his former military comrade. Andy, visibly disheveled and haunted, tells David that it's too late for him and demands that David finish the mission by killing Julia. David is shocked and desperately tries to talk Andy down, urging him to surrender, but in a heartbreaking turn of events, Andy pulls the trigger on himself, ending his own life. After the confrontation, Julia is taken to a secure hotel to ensure her safety. When David arrives to check on her, she is still deeply shaken and distressed. David finds her crying and tries to offer comfort. As their hands accidentally touch, Julia tells him that she's not a queen and that he's allowed to be close to her. David responds with a comforting hug, which quickly escalates into an intimate moment. The emotional weight of the situation brings them closer together, and they share a passionate kiss and make love. The following day, David meets with his boss, who praises him for his bravery and informs him that he will be recommended for a commendation. However, the conversation takes a troubling turn when his boss presses him for details about Julia's recent meetings and her hidden agendas. David is deeply disturbed by the request and feels conflicted about divulging such information. His boss reveals that Julia is a dangerous politician with potentially sinister motives. She discloses that Julia was aware of the planned attack on the school, but chose not to inform David, despite knowing his children were at risk. The revelation leaves David stunned and grappling with a profound sense of betrayal and confusion as he struggles to reconcile his role as Julia's protector with the unsettling truth about her actions.